2nd December. But due to various reasons, celebration of the foundation couldn't be held exactly on the same date. But we are hosting the celebration on a convenient date in December of this year. Needless to mention, Acute started the journey in 2001 and is functioning as a registered association since 2002. To celebrate our Foundation Day, today we have among us Professor Alok Rai, one of our distinguished, Alok Rai, one of our distinguished senior alumni, who will deliver the Foundation Month lecture. His presentation will be on the topic of globalization, growth, poverty, and equality. Dr. Alok Rai is a former professor of economics at IIM, Calcutta, where he taught for more than 30 years. He is a PhD from University of Rochester, USA. Professor Rai has also taught at several universities in India: Delhi School of Economics, Calcutta University, Jadavpur University, USA, Cornell University, University of Rochester, University of Pittsburgh, Portland State University, Canada, Queen's University, Ontario, and Australia, Monash University, Melbourne. He has been a consultant to UN, World Bank, the Copenhagen Consensus, an international think tank, Government of India, and several private sector companies. He is the author of a book, Trade, Protection, and Economic Policy, Macmillan, and many professional articles in leading national and international journals. In addition to writing regular columns in newspaper on current issues, he is a recipient of the prestigious V.K.R.V. Rao Prize in Economics for his research contributions and Best Teacher of Economic Award by Bengal Economic Association. Professor Ofirup Sarkar obtained his bachelor's degree in economics from Presidency College and a master's from the University of Calcutta. He did his PhD from the University of Rochester and has spent most of his academic career at the Indian Statistical Institute, from where he has recently retired. He has also taught and researched at various other places in India and abroad, including the University of Florida, USA, Brigham Young University, USA, Concordia University, Canada, International Center for Economic Research, Italy, and the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. The primary areas of his research are international trade and economic development. Apart from contributing to scholarly journals like the International Economic Review, the Journal of Development Economics, the Journal of International Economics, the Journal of Public Economics, Economica, and the Economic and Political Weekly, he regularly writes popular pieces and periodicals. He was the chairman of the 4th and the 5th State Finance Commission and the 6th Pay Commission of West Bengal. He currently chairs the West Bengal Infrastructure Development Finance Corporation and the West Bengal Small Industries Development Corporation. He was a member of the Technical Advisory Committee on Survey of the Reserve Bank of India, of the group of advisors to the Union Finance Minister on G20 matters, and of the July for Infosys Prize in Social Sciences. This is the first event organized under my presidency by the new CC of ACUED, which has taken responsibility for the financial year 2025 to 2027. I request your cooperation to make it a grand success in intellectual discourse. I also thank all my CC members, other volunteers, and the IDSK authorities, without whose cooperation the event couldn't have been organized. I now hand over the microphone to the Secretary, Dev Shubhropal, to say a few words and arrange to felicitate the speaker and the chair before handing over to the speaker to make his presentation.
শুভ সন্ধ্যা। আগত সমস্ত দর্শক শ্রোতা বৃন্দকে অ্যালামনি অ্যাসোসিয়েশন অফ ক্যালকাটা ইউনিভার্সিটি ইকোনমিক্সের তরফ থেকে স্বাগত। মুনমুন্দি যেরকম বললেন, আমরা এবছর আমাদের রজত জয়ন্তী বর্ষ উদযাপন করা শুরু করেছি এবং তার প্রথম পর্বে আজকের এই অনুষ্ঠান অ্যালামনি অ্যাসোসিয়েশন অফ ক্যালকাটা ইউনিভার্সিটি ইকোনমিক্স ডিপার্টমেন্ট বা অ্যাকুয়েডের ফাউন্ডেশন ডে লেকচার। আজ থেকে 25 বছর আগে এমনই এক ডিসেম্বরের সন্ধ্যায় অ্যাকুয়েড তার যাত্রা শুরু করেছিল এবং যারা সেদিন এই যাত্রা শুরুর সঙ্গী ছিলেন তাদের মধ্যে কয়েকজন আজকে আমাদের সাথে আছেন। শ্রীমতী অর্পিতা ভট্টাচার্য, শ্রী প্রবল দে, শ্রী উত্তম ভট্টাচার্য, আর কেউ আছেন কিনা আমার মনে হচ্ছে নেই আর কেউ। হ্যাঁ, মানে পরে তো সবাই অনেকেই এসছেন, তাদের মধ্যে অনেকেই আজকে এখানে আছেন। তো সেই তাদের যে উদ্যোগ সেটা আজ 25 বছর পেরিয়ে আজকের এখানে পৌঁছেছে, সেটা অবশ্যই একটা বিরাট ব্যাপার আমাদের প্রত্যেক অ্যাকুয়েডিয়ানের জন্য। এবং আমরা আশা করব যে এই যাত্রাপথ আরও সুন্দর হবে, আরও অনেক 25 বছর অ্যাকুয়েড অতিক্রম করবে। তো যাই হোক, আজকের এই সন্ধ্যায় আমরা আমাদের মধ্যে পেয়েছি প্রফেসর আলোক রায়, যিনি আজকের অনুষ্ঠানে বক্তা, এবং প্রফেসর অভিরূপ সরকার, যিনি এই অনুষ্ঠানে পৌরোহিত্য করছেন। তো প্রথমে আমি মুনমুন্দিকে অনুরোধ করব যে মুনমুন্দি আপনি একটু এসে যদি ফেলিসিটেশনের জন্য বলেন। আমরা আজকে প্রফেসর রায় এবং প্রফেসর সরকারকে অ্যাকুয়েডের তরফ থেকে সংবর্ধনা জানিয়ে আমরা নিজেরা সম্মানিত হব। ধন্যবাদ।
Thank you, Dev Shubhro. Thank you, Pritidi, for your welcome address. We now have the proud privilege of felicitating our distinguished guest speaker and the esteemed session chair. May we request Trinath Krishna Sinha, the past president of ACUED, to kindly present a shawl to Alokda. A round of applause, please. Pritidi, current president of ACUED, to present a shawl to Obhirupta. Uttam Bhattacharya, former secretary of ACUED, to kindly present a memento to Alokda. Amitabh Ganguly, former Secretary of Acute, to kindly present a memento to Obhirupta. Last but definitely not the least, Urpita Bhattacharya, former Secretary of Acute, to kindly present a badge to Alokda. Honorary Life Membership Badge. A bigger round of applause, please. ঘুরে দাঁড়ান দাদা। Thank you so much, thank you all. May we now request Professor Abhirup Sarkar, our session chair today, to kindly address us, to kindly deliver his opening address as the session chair. Over to you, Dada. ওখানেও বলতে পারেন।
Thank you very much for this honor. It's indeed an honor for me to preside a session where Professor Alok Rai is the speaker. For a short while, I was a student, a fellowship student at IIM, and Professor Alok Rai was a professor, and we all used to look at him with awe. Later, I became his colleague for a very short while again. Such a wonderful economist and such a wonderful person. So I'm really honored to be here. I was a bit taken aback when I found out that apart from being a chair, I have to speak for about 15 minutes. I was not really prepared for that. But anyway, since we are running a bit late, I will be as brief as possible, because you will learn whatever there is to learn from Alokda. I will just introduce the subject perhaps. Globalization, it had different phases if you look at history, but the recentmost phase, one can say, started with the fall of the Soviet Union in the 80s, let's say. The next 3 decades of globalization, basically involving freer movements of goods and services as well as that of capital, this globalization was followed by 2 things. One is a rise in growth rates, almost in all countries which participated in globalization. Indeed, globalization posed new opportunities for all the countries. And second, at the same time, there was a significant rise in inequality, again, almost across all countries. Lot of people would attribute both the increase in growth as well as the increase in inequality to globalization itself. For India, for example, just to give you how growth and inequality increased in India. This is from a book, from a paper actually, from a paper by Chancellor and Piketty, which came out in 2017, In India, yearly growth of per capita income during 51 to 80, the earlier phase, the phase before globalization, was something around 1.7%, which was quite low. And during the next phase, the phase of globalization, 1980 to 2015, the growth rate for per capita income was 3.3%. So there was definitely a significant rise in growth. As for inequality, again this is from Chancellor and Piketty, during 1951 to 1980, income of bottom 50% of the population grew at 2.2% per year. Top 10% income grew at 1.2% per year, and top 0.001%, the really rich, the super rich, their income actually went down. There was a negative growth of -2% per year during this period. During the next phase, when growth rates were much higher, income of bottom 50% grew at 1.9%. Earlier, it was 2.2%. Top 10% grew at 5.1% compared with 1.2%. And top 0.001%, their growth rate, per capita growth rate, was 9.4% per year. So clearly this just indicates that there was a rise in inequality. Now, traditional theory, both growth theory as well as theories of international trade, I think can neither explain the rise in growth nor the rise in inequality. In what sense? Let me explain. Traditional growth theory, as we know, is from solo growth model, where growth rates are virtually exogenous. And per capita income does not grow at all. Of course, you could have per capita income growth, but if there is technical progress. But again, technical progress is exogenous. In particular, it's hard to relate the increase in growth to globalization or any opening up of trade. During the 80s, a bunch of new models came up, which came to be known as endogenous growth models, where growth, very, broadly speaking, growth is driven by innovations. Growth is endogenous and it's driven by innovations. Now, as trade opens up, after globalization, trade opens up, it allows advanced countries to specialize in R&D, in innovations, in innovative activities, and less developed countries in manufacturing. So there is specialization. Those who are good at R&D, they specialize in R&D. Those who are good at manufacturing, they specialize in manufacturing. As a result, there is more technical progress, more growth. Roughly, this is the story one can tell in an endogenous growth framework. Again, if you go by the standard, I'm talking about international trade. If you go by the standard Heckscher-Ohlin model or the Stolper-Samuelson theorem, it's hard to predict the rise in inequality, because we know that if trade opens up by the Stolper-Samuelson theorem, the labor-intensive country, let's say, roughly say it's the less developed country, their labor is gaining, we know that. Whereas in the capital-intensive country, labor is losing and capital is gaining. So you can think of a rise in inequality in the advanced countries, which are exporting capital-intensive good, but not in the less developed countries, which are exporting labor-intensive good. So traditional standard Stolper-Samuelson theorem cannot explain. So there were newer models, more recent trade models. For example, just to give you an example, you could have three types of labor. Say, very skilled, skilled, and unskilled. Very skilled can do good research, let's say. And if there is autarky, some of this very skilled are into manufacturing as well. But as trade opens up, the advanced country can specialize in research and development activities using the very skilled workers to the full extent in R&D activities, whereas the less developed countries can specialize in manufacturing using skilled labor. However, okay, so in the advanced countries, there is a shift of income in favor of very skilled, so there is a rise in inequality. On the other hand, in the less developed country, there is a shift of income from unskilled to skilled. So again, there is a rise in inequality. So this is one way. There are various models. This is one possible way one can explain rise in inequality in both countries. So of course, Alokda will be talking about all these things. I will just talk about one small thing, not small thing, but it's there in the literature. There is a controversy as to whether, it's accepted that there has been a rise in growth and there has been a rise in inequality. The controversy is about whether this rise in inequality and growth, whether it's due to globalization or whether it is due to technical progress. So you see, from the mid-80s, 90s onwards, there has been a remarkable shift towards mechanization, towards computerization all over the world. So, labor is made redundant, increasingly redundant. And that reduces the demand for labor, and which in turn, shifts income in favor of capital and against labor. That is one explanation, people try to explain it that way. But this also led to efficiency and higher growth. So that is another literature which it's basically an empirical question, empirical literature, whether it's due to globalization or whether it's due to mechanization or technical progress. So all these things are open. These are open questions, and I just ask Alokda to take over. Let me stop here. Thank you very much.
হ্যালো ঠিক আছে দেখুন তো হ্যালো শোনা যাচ্ছে হ্যালো হ্যালো তাহলে ওখানে চলে যাচ্ছি হ্যাঁ সেটাই সেই জন্য সেটা কয়েকটা কাগজপত্র ছিল দেখতে সুবিধা এখানে বসে পড়তে হ্যালো হ্যালো কিংবা এমনি মাইক্রোফোন আর থাকলে হতে পারে হ্যালো 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 ঠিক আছে ইনকেস খুব বেশি লোক নেই ফাঁকা গলাতেও শোনা যাবে হয়তো Okay, so let me start with my association with Katakol and by extension Acute. I was a student at Katakol 1963 to 65 and then taught at Katakol from 65 to middle of 68 and then went to US to do my PhD. Okay. So that's about my That's about all about my association with Katakol. the end of my talk, I'll come back to my one experience in Katakol, one debate on globalization, and there's something funny about it, but anyway, I'll come back to that at the end of this talk. Now, the topic that I've chosen is a fairly broad one. It covers a whole lot of area, and one can almost teach a full course on this. In fact, I myself have taught a course on globalization in several universities in the US, a large part of which is dealt with these issues. So given the time constraint, of course, what I'll propose to do is that I'll touch upon a number of issues without going into the details. Or in a sense, I will give you some kind of a summary of what we know and what we don't know about the linkages between globalization, growth. এখন শোনা যাচ্ছে বেটার? আচ্ছা। Now taking up the main subject matter. The basic question is, does globalization benefit or hurt the poor? Is it pro-poor or anti-poor? I mean, because there has been an apprehension that, to use a metaphor, that the tide of globalization, instead of raising all boats, will drown some boats, particularly the small boats owned by the poor people. I mean, this is the apprehension about this. Now, so what I'll propose to do is that, to what extent this is true. First of all, what are the linkages between all these things? First, I will talk about it in terms of economic theory, and then in terms of available empirical evidence, whatever we have. But before I go any further, I think I'll have to solve a definitional problem, because globalization means many different things to many different people. To some, it might mean globalization of information, globalization of culture, globalization of styles, fashions, and all these things are part of globalization. I mean, there is no doubt about that. So, but for my purpose here, I'll define globalization as free international trade in goods, services, capital, and technology, but within capital, only long-term capital flows, which otherwise we call FDI. In other words, I will leave aside the short-term capital movements from this definition of globalization. The reason being that even very strong supporters of globalization, like Professor Jagdish Bhagwati or John Williamson, whose name is particularly associated with the so-called Washington Consensus and the IMF, World Bank, Stabilization cum Structural Adjustment Package, etc. They also want to avoid, as far as possible, these short-term capital movements. Because it has been found in several financial crises in the world, like Asian financial crisis, and then there was there was also a crisis in Argentina, then the more recent 2007-8 financial crisis and banking crisis in US. Even if in some cases the problem or the thing has originated in some other sector, but these are definitely aggravated by short-term speculative capital movements. It is generally accepted. Therefore, short-term capital movements, the speculative kind, will be out of my purview. Now, those who think that globalization, by and large, helps the poor people, they basically emphasize a two-step link. The basic idea is that globalization increases the growth rate, and increase in growth rate reduces poverty. So there's basically two-step link. So let's first talk about the first link, that is globalization and growth. Now, as I said, by globalization, I basically means free. I should be very clear here. I don't mean free trade. Free trade means going at the end of the spectrum. No trade at one end of the spectrum, free trade at other end of the spectrum. There is no country in this world which follows that theoretical free trade, where there is no restrictions. All countries have some restrictions. So generally, when I talk of globalization, I mean somewhat freer trade. But it's something funny that freer trade is less free than free trade. I mean, at least that's how economists use the term. Okay, let me first concentrate on the first link. Now here, basically, economic theory says that free trade in first trade according to comparative advantage, as we know, increases the so-called static efficiency of resource allocation. So we produce more of the goods in which we have so-called comparative advantage. That is one thing. But on a more practical plane, there are several other factors which are more important. One is the enforced efficiency effect. Because whenever there is freer trade in goods and services, basically, when our domestic producers so far protected, now will have to face competition from cheaper or sometimes better quality goods from abroad. So in order to survive, they will have to improve their efficiency. So this is called enforced efficiency effect. Same thing is true about the export industries also. Because if you have to sell in the export market is generally much more competitive than your domestic market. And therefore, also in order to succeed there, you will have to upgrade your technology, reduce your costs. Otherwise, you will basically be wiped out in the export market. Now, another thing, here I will emphasize the role of FDI. Now, FDI, in addition to bringing capital or investment, also brings in newer technologies and give you access to global marketing channels. In today's world, this global marketing channels is a very, very important thing. We economics generally, we don't bother much about marketing. That's for the business people or business school thing. But in real life, marketing is a very, very important thing. For example, suppose you have very good quality product, but you cannot sell it in the, let us say, the shopping malls or the retail chains in US, because marketing, all those things are basically controlled by multinational corporations. So unless you allow multinational corporations to come here, you will not be able to sell your goods, let's say, through Walmart, even if you have very good quality products. Okay, that is why FDI enables our domestic producers to get access to these global marketing channels. So this is a very important thing which is often ignored in economics or ignored by economists, so to say. Okay, so that is the first part in theory. The second part, let's suppose growth increases for whatever reason. Here economists are more or less unanimous that growth, for whatever reason it occurs, usually reduces poverty. Even though there is some doubt about the first link. I'll talk about the doubts about the first link, at least in the Indian context. But let me now focus on the second link, that is growth and poverty reduction. Here, two channels are emphasized. One, growth creates jobs, including jobs for the poor. Now, I remember several decades back, there was again a debate on this, that the growth that is taking place in India is in the form of glitzy shopping malls and multiplexes and so on. This is all for the benefit of the rich. Again, there was a debate organized by yes, organized by Acute, and I happened to be one of the participants there. So there I said something which I will again repeat. Now this is often a mistaken notion, that even when these glitzy shopping malls, multiplexes, or these gated, multi-storied residential complexes are coming up, yes, poor people do not benefit as consumers. However, they do benefit in terms of jobs, both in the construction phase as construction workers, and then when these are in operation. If you go to any shopping mall, you will see there are lots of low-paid, low-skilled workers at work. They are involved in as shop floor assistants, and there will be a lot of maintenance people, the plumbers, the electricians. Then there will be a lot of people who are cleaning that are involved in the cleaning business, so to say. And then in the food court, there will be lots of people who will be serving you food and all that. So these people generally are coming from very ordinary families. Therefore, even when it might look like that the growth is, the kind of growth that we're having is entirely for the benefit of the rich, that is not the case. The benefits do go to poor people in terms of various kinds of job creation. This is one link. The second one is this, that when growth increases, tax revenue, the tax GDP ratio in particular, not only the absolute one, but usually the tax GDP ratio goes up, that enables the government to spend more on pro-poor programs. You see, starting from the second 5-year plan document, we have all the time talking about poverty alleviation and all that. But many of the schemes that you now have only been possible because now the government has got much more tax revenue. Otherwise, many of these pious wishes, they only remained on this planning commission documents. But now, like this Manrega or Awas Yojana, various other kinds of pro-poor programs done by both central government and state governments, these have been possible only because the tax revenue has gone up. Okay? And that has been made possible by higher growth rate. Okay? So this is what we can say from economic theory. Now, if I look at the empirical evidence, particularly in the Indian context, what do we have? Ovidup has mentioned about some figures, but the figures that I have in mind are quite different from the Piketty figures. I know, all these figures are always controversial. Yeah. But basically, in terms of growth rate, you can say that generally, for the period from independence to mid-1980s, the so-called period of license permit Raj, India's average growth rate of GDP used to be around 3.5%, the so-called Hindu growth rate, as it's called to call it. But then from the mid-1985, particularly from 1991 to the recent time, the average growth rate has been around 6.5%, which is a big jump. From 3.5 to 6.5 is a very big jump. So that is there. But at the same time, poverty ratio, by that I mean percentage of population below some kind of poverty line, because again, there are all kinds of measures of this poverty thing, but let us just focus on this so-called head count poverty ratio, okay? The number of people below any kind of poverty line. Wherever you set the poverty line, there are various kinds of things like the Tendulkar line, World Bank $1 a day line, World Bank $2 a day, and so on. But whatever figure or whatever line you choose, if you stick to that, by whatever measure, yes, lots of people have been pulled above that poverty line. And that has been made possible because of higher growth rate. Because if we compare the period, as I said, from independence to 1985, and from, say, 1985 to more or less current times, yes, not only poverty ratio has fallen, but it has also been found that the rate of decline of poverty has been more when the growth rate is higher in those years. That is also more or less a correlation that has been found there. So you can say that basically growth has been higher and poverty ratio has gone up. This is more or less accepted. The same thing is true, has been in India, same thing has been true in China also. In fact, in China, the growth rate has been much higher than India's. We can say it was for at least 2.5 decades, they had near 10% growth rate, whereas we had only 6.5. But the China's performance on reduction of poverty also is much better than India's. So again, you can say that is primarily because the Chinese growth rate is higher. I have not yet talked about inequality, but I should just mention here that in both India and China, just as poverty ratio has fallen, inequality has gone up in both the countries, despite the two countries having two vastly different political systems. Now, this point has to be emphasized because often you hear in popular discussions, inequality is going up in India because of crony capitalism. But then how about China? They don't have capitalism. They have much bigger state control of resources, a single party communist system, not this multi-party chaotic democracy. But despite all these differences, we have the same kind of economic trends in both the countries. That growth rate has gone up, poverty has gone down, inequality has gone up. So merely changing, you can say, political systems, it's not easy to reverse this thing. And here I'll also mention one particular thing before I go any further. See, here globalization has a role to play. Because what has happened is that now that the different economies have now been integrated with, and there is free movement of, you can say, capital, now what has happened is that now we have got a lots of tax havens throughout the world. When we were young people, we used to hear only of Switzerland, that's all, where you can keep money in Swiss banks. But now nobody keeps money in Swiss banks. I mean, why on low interest rate? There are far more attractive places like Dubai, and there are many other places where you do not have to pay any income tax. And then you have Mauritius, you have Cayman Islands, you have Bahamas and all that. So the super rich people can easily transfer their money to all those places, and the ownership will be kept secret. So your money, you can send it to Mauritius, and then the same money will come back to India, but under a different name, because there will be many shell companies which will be registered in Mauritius. So I will send my money to Mauritius, and then this money will come back as FDI, and getting all kinds of advantages which FDI gets. So given this reality, it is very difficult to increase the tax rate on the super rich. This is the reality, because the moment you try to do that, they will transfer their capital to all those places, and your tax base will shrink. Yes, you may increase your tax rate, but then what is the base? The base will shrink because all this capital will then go away. And another thing is that all countries are trying to attract foreign capital, particularly FDI. So all countries are competing with one another, and all countries are trying to reduce the corporate tax rate. As you will see, that personal income tax rate, that is the maximum personal income tax rate, generally in most countries is 40% or above. Even in India, if you take the surcharge and all that, it will be 40 or 40. But corporate tax rate cannot go more than 20%. Because if you have a higher rate, then money will not come here, money will go to other countries. So globalization has actually restricted, you can say, our ability to tax the super rich. I mean, this is the reality. So this is also one of the main reasons why inequality is going up in this globalization phase. Now, what is the solution? Solution would be then there has to be some kind of an international agreement that no country will reduce, let us say, corporate tax rate below 30% or whatever. But unless such a thing happens, the inequality is going to go up, and you cannot increase your tax rate on the super rich. However much you can shout about it in popular discussions or in parliament, there are practical constraints on that. I mean, that is something which you will have to keep in mind. Now, let me now again go back to this two-step link. What is the empirical evidence? Now, there is a slight problem here in the, as far as the Indian data is concerned. Now, the link between growth and the link between globalization and growth. In India, the problem is that if you look at the empirical evidence, now our liberalization thing started around 1991, but this had two aspects. One is internal liberalization, or the abolition of the so-called license permit Raj, abolition of industrial licensing and the license permit Raj. Another is external sector liberalization. But the problem is that these two types of liberalization took place at the same time. So statistically or by using econometric methods or whatever you do, it is not possible to separate out the effect of external liberalization and internal liberalization. So there are economists in India who say, oh, no, this is nothing to do with globalization. This is because of internal liberalization or the abolition of license permit Raj. The point is that empirically, it's not possible to actually resolve this debate, because it's simply impossible to do it. The other part, as I said, even all Indian economists, whether left of center or right of center or whatever, generally agrees that yes, higher growth rate brings about reduction in poverty. That is empirically established, as I said, in both India, China, and many other countries. In fact, there are big cross-country regression analysis also, which also shows that growth is, as the in technical language, growth is distribution neutral kind of thing. In other words, when average income or per capita income goes up, the poor people's income also, in most cases, there are exceptions. Actually, there is one study which is often referred to, which is called the Dollar-Cray study. There were two World Bank economists who used a huge quantity of data over a large number of countries, and then they fitted regression. And they found that the slope of the regression is something like I think it's about. Okay, basically, what the mean is that if average growth rate of per capita income grows up by 5%, then poor people's income goes up by 6%. Again, there are exceptions. This particular picture does not hold in 20% of the cases they studied. So, if a country is unfortunate to fall in that 1 out of 5 thing, then this particular what should I say? This particular picture will not hold. But then generally it has been found that the exceptional countries mostly were in Latin American countries, and they had other kinds of issues like the land distribution, and often the political systems in many cases are different. Many of them were dictatorial regimes. In other words, initial conditions, other conditions, all those things will affect the result to some extent, but by and large, as I said, in the 80% of the cases, when per capita income increases, the poor man's income also increases by the same rate, sometimes even higher rate. Okay, so that has been statistically established, you can say. Now, let me now change track and take my discussion.
Is it consistent with rise in inequality?
Which one? No, it's not actually, in a sense, I mean.
Right.
Because you see, average income is poor man's income is also increasing. Right. But actually, again, the trouble is that it still does not tell us anything about the top 1%, etc. That is another kind of thing. Because nowadays there's a lot of focus on what the top 1% or top 5% is having relative to bottom 5%, bottom 10. But even you see the definition. The definition of poor also is very, very complicated. Yeah. By poor, do you mean the bottom 2%? Bottom 10%, bottom 20%, bottom 40%, because there is a Piketty studies, etc. Sometimes they talk about 40% kind of thing. Yes. Yeah. Because even within the poor, there are different kinds of poor people. Right. Some are destitute at the very bottom, and some are not so poor, etc. And often we lump together when we talk about bottom 10% or bottom 20%. All right, now I will now take my discussion in a slightly different. How much time do I have, roughly?
15 minutes or
Please continue, sir.
20?
Please continue.
Okay. Yeah. Now,
actually, Professor Ray started at 5.
Okay,
So
all right.
Continue till 6.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right. Okay. So now I will focus on certain kinds of processes which are at work, which link, you can say, or which determines, you can say, the impact of globalization on the poor people. There are a number of processes at work, so I will now distinguish between some of these processes. The first one is this, that in other words, the poor people have got different roles. They are consumers, they are also, you can say, self-employed people also in some cases. They run very small business or hawkers or whatever. And there are some who work as wage workers, and so on. Okay? So let us distinguish between these different kinds of roles of poor person. First, let me focus on the role of poor person as a consumer. Now, how does globalization affect? Here, a lot depends upon how relative prices change. Let me give you an example. Let us suppose a country exports food grains, imports Scotch whiskey. So who will lose and who will gain? Obviously, the poor people will lose, because when we export food grains prices go up, right? And when you import Scotch whiskey prices go down here. So the richer people will benefit here, and the poorer people will lose here. So a lot depends upon not just the quantum of trade or exports and imports, but the composition of trade is also important. See, what goods we are exporting, what goods we are importing, and so on. So this is one process. The second one is, let's consider the role of poor people as self-employed workers. Now, many poor people work as marginal farmers, artisans, petty entrepreneurs in small shops or firms, but even without globalization, they face enormous difficulties in facing competition from better endowed domestic producers. Now, unless the domestic policy constraints which limit their access to finance, marketing, technology, etc. are removed, greater exposure to international competition will further ruin their livelihood. But again, there will be poor producers of some specialty products who may still gain, like handicrafts. Handicrafts often have very good export market, because these are very, very specialty kind of product. I'll give you one example. Many people have. Kolhapuri chappals under Brada brand name sells at 10 or 15 times the price of Kolhapuri chappal here. So which basically means the makers of Kolhapuri chappal can get a much higher price when they get global markets. This could be true about many organic fruits, vegetables, mushrooms, and many of the such products which have a market in developed country, in the developed countries, so to say. Okay, so you can get a much better price, but of course, it is easier said than done because there are lots of other requirements which must be met in order for this to happen. I'll come back to that in terms of the two basic problems of poor people. One is that who are poor or why some people are poor. If you ask that question, I will sum it up in terms of two things. One, poor endowment and poor connectivity. Okay. Anyway, I'll take it up at the end. So still, so what I'm emphasizing here is that producers, even small producers or poor producers of some specialty products, may benefit when global market opens up, as I mentioned about Kolhapuri chappals or organic fruits, vegetables, and things of that sort. And the same thing is true about basmati rice, mangoes. If you can sell all those things either to Gulf countries or even to US. Nowadays you can get even Indian mangoes in Europe or America, and they sell at much higher prices there. Now, let us now consider the role of poor people as wage earners. Now, here, Ovidup was mentioning about our Stolper-Samuelson theorem or our 2 by 2 by 2 Hexa-Rollin kind of framework. Now, this 2 by 2 Hexa-Rollin framework is totally inadequate here. Let me explain why. Because there you basically assume that there are two countries. One country is capital abundant, another country is labor abundant, right? And when trade opens up, the wage rate in the labor abundant country goes up. Opposite happens in the capital abundant country. But in real life, the problem is you have countries at different levels of development. In other words, you have Mexico, China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, all are labor abundant countries, but not equally labor abundant. The wage rates are different. So what happens is this. So suppose that a lot of countries now open up to international trade at the same time. Now, one would expect that, okay, the Mexican workers would benefit because wage rate in Mexico is lower than the wage rate in US. But the trouble here is that the wage rate in Vietnam could be even lower. Therefore, Mexican workers will not benefit. They will also lose out to Vietnamese workers or Bangladeshi workers. So in real life, the problem is much more complicated. In other words, and then there is the distinction between skilled labor and unskilled labor, which Ovidup was also talking about. So in many cases, what might happen, the technology is becoming much more skill intensive, or much more, what should I say, technology has a skill bias, as they call it. So what is happening in many cases is that the skilled workers are benefiting at the expense of unskilled workers in all countries of the world, including the so-called labor-abundant countries. Okay? In other words, labor is not a homogeneous thing. There are different grades of labor also, just as there are countries at different stages of development, and therefore the real-life situation is far more complicated than what is captured in that simple Hexa-Rollin framework or Stolper-Samuelson framework. Now, there is another thing. When a country opens up to international competition, then you have to meet international production standards. Then some firms, even in labor-abundant countries, will have to switch to more machine and technology-intensive methods of production. The same thing has happened in construction. the kind of construction work that we used to have or used to see in our younger days that have totally vanished, so to say. When you see these big high-rise buildings, etc., you don't see the very labor-intensive kind of thing anymore. I mean, lots of machines are nowadays being used. The same thing is true about, the same thing is true as consumers have also been exposed to better quality product. Because I remember when first TV came here, I mean, there are lots of TVs used to be made by almost all state governments, like the Webel and then Konark and all kinds of things. And I've seen some even color TV sets where the color, what the color is moving ahead of the person and kind of thing. But even those TVs are selling because people have not seen Sony or LG or those things. But now, after people have seen, they know this is the real TV. So now then Webel, Konark, all these things have vanished, right? And this is also happens. The consumers become aware of better quality products. And these better quality products, in order to produce the better quality products, you also have to use much more sophisticated machines, etc. So which will replace labor. So this is also an effect of globalization. All right, now, another important channel is remittances. Remittances is also another very important thing. Well, there are the two kinds of remittances. One is the remittances by, say, software engineers. These are high-skilled people, etc. And most of them come from relatively affluent families. The software engineers usually do not come from poor families. But there is another kind of remittance which have happened. Lots of Keralites, for example, have gone to Gulf countries, and they are construction workers, carpenters, tailors, electricians, nurses, and they are sending money to their families in India. So a lot of poor families are benefiting through this remittance channel. In fact, Kerala has very recently boasting of a state with zero poverty. Right? One of the reasons, I'm not saying the only reason, is this flow of remittances in Kerala. And this is a very stable kind of income. Is much better than foreign aid, because first of all, foreign aid is not a very stable thing. It depends upon the whims of the giver. And second, there is also a problem of leakage in foreign aid, because foreign aid comes to the government, and then there will be lots of corruption here in distributing but there is no such problem in remittances. It comes directly to the family, and the poor family directly benefits. So this is a very important, what should I say, mechanism by which the poor people are benefiting. But again, I will not say all Indians are benefiting. This migration or to Gulf countries mostly occurring from only very few states. Because even in order to do that, you need to have some minimum amount of education and skills. Just agricultural workers cannot just go there, Gulf countries. Here I'll mention an anecdote. I attended an international conference a few decades back. At that time, this East Asian miracle was very much in discussion in all kinds of international conferences and all that. So a Korean professor was talking about the Korean development model and all that. In the question and answer session, one person asked this question, that can you tell me in one sentence why Korean economy is doing so well, but Mexican economy is not? He said, yes, I can answer. Korean workers can read manuals, Mexican workers can't. Now this emphasizes a very, very important point, that you see, technology is changing at a very fast rate in today's world, and we don't know what will happen when AI comes in full-blown form, but even before that, right? So the workers will have to absorb these new technologies. The new technologies will have to be absorbed at the grassroots or the soft floor level. For that, you need to read manuals and understand it. Often you will see in Goriahat, you see, I was looking for a carpenter who will be able to fit a Godrej lock, which goes into the door kind of thing. Now, I went to this hardware shop in Goriahat and asked for a carpenter. He said there is only one carpenter who can do it. There are lots of carpenters. Because there is a manual which you will have to read and then you will have to translate it and do it. But most of the carpenters there are simply not able to do this very simple thing. Right? So this actually shows that often we emphasize the role of education, etc., and so on. But it is not literacy or simply, let's say, passing school final exam some way or other. You need vocational training, and you also need, as I say, the ability to understand the manual, and you have to know how to apply these changing technologies. So that kind of education is needed. And then a person must have the ability also to learn new things, because all the time new technologies are coming in. Even maybe at a very simple level, but still even their technologies is changing. Okay. So that is one of the major problems. Okay. Now, let me come back to the more fundamental question. As I said, why some people are poor? Now, I will say this is because of two basic reasons. One, poor endowment. I mean, the poor people have poor endowment of physical capital, financial capital, or human capital. That is their problem. Okay? So even if globalization opens up new opportunities, it is only the better endowed people who will be able to make use of these opportunities. In fact, that is one of the main reasons why with globalization inequality is going up. Because better endowed people who have better education or who have more money, and therefore they're able to also to pursue, let us say, more expensive kind of education. And those firms who are relatively big, because scale is a very important factor in order to compete in international market. I mean, this is one of the reasons why China is beating many other countries. It is because China can produce something on a much, much bigger scale. Here we have our labor laws which actually, what should I say, discourage firms to grow beyond a certain level. Now, very recently, some of these labor laws have been changed, as you know. That previously, the limit was 100 workers. Now it has been raised to 300 workers according to very recent legislation. So one of the major reasons, or one of the major objectives behind this is that India, in order to compete with China and many other countries, will have to scale up. Unless you are big, you simply cannot compete, because economies of scale and various other things are very, very important. Unless you are big, you will not be able to compete with them. You see, this is also one of the major reasons why inequality is going up, because today's world is a world of big companies. If you're a small company, you simply cannot survive in international competition nowadays. Anyway, so one problem is the poor endowment problem. The other problem is the poor connectivity problem. Let us suppose that some farmer in remote Sundarban does produce good quality tomatoes. But if he cannot bring that tomato to the town, and if he has to sell it in the local market, then maybe he will have to sell it at ₹5 or so. Whether if you can bring it to the market, maybe you will get ₹20 to the nearest town. If you can bring it to Kolkata, maybe you will be able to sell at 50. If If he's able to sell it in UAE or Dubai, maybe he will be able to get 200 rupees or whatever. Therefore, unless you improve, unless you connect these poor people to the market, even if they are producing good quality product, or even if they have got certain kind of skills, they are simply not able to sell it in the market. This is the reason why software engineers are doing so well. Because here connectivity is no problem. Even if you have bad roads and all that, your product is going through the net. You see, this is one of the main reasons why India relied on service-led growth, whereas China could rely on manufacturing-led growth. Because in infrastructure, physical infrastructure, we are in a very bad state. But China spent huge amount of resources, and China did not have these problems which we face in a multi-party parliamentary democracy. There are huge problems in land acquisition or getting environmental clearances and all those things. All those problems do not exist in China. If the Chinese government think that a factory will be here, even if, or a road will be here, even if it goes through your thing, the morning you will come out, brushing your teeth, and you find there is an X marked on your door, which means road will go through your door. You just cannot do anything. Okay? But you cannot do it here. You know how the expansion of metro often is being stopped in a very small, place. It cannot be connected because there is some kind of a land acquisition problem. Okay? But all these problems do not exist in China. Anyway, so the problem is that you have to improve your connectivity. By connectivity, I mean you must have much better roads, rails, public transport systems and all that. Here, let me give you another example. You see, if you can take your cart rows to Amsterdam market within 24 hours of cutting, you will get double the price. But in order to avail this opportunity, first you will need refrigerated vans from your farm gate to the airport, and then a cargo plane must be ready right there to take it to Amsterdam, and you also need cooperative customs officials who will not hold up your consignment and will say, you will have to fill up this so many forms and all that, and then they will inspect your thing one by one, and in the process damage your things and all that. Okay? So there are global opportunities there, but in order to make use of these opportunities, you need to have connectivity. So these are the two important things. Therefore, basically, in order for poor people to make use of these global opportunities, we need to have what is called globalization plus. Globalization is part of the solution, but only a part, not the full solution. It has to be complemented by right kind of domestic policies, and far more importantly, you will have to implement those policies in a far more efficient and far less corrupt ways. If we can do that, then many poor people will be able to make use of these global opportunities which globalization is actually opening up. In other words, here, the fault does not lie with globalization. Fault does not lie with IMF, World Bank, or WTO rules. The fault lies with our domestic policies and their inadequate implementation. There we'll have to, in other words, we basically will have to improve you have to give quality education to poor people's children. You will have to provide them much improved public transport system so that they can go to the towns and sell their goods or services or whatever. So these are the things which are absolutely essential. Otherwise, even if global opportunities open up, many of the poor people and poor families will not be able to make use of those opportunities. Is there anything else that I like to say at this time? Okay. So then, maybe I should make also one or two comments about the concept of poverty and inequality. Yeah, because there is some time. You see, whenever I talk on Indian economy, in whatever forum, I all the time know that one question will be coming up. Just wait for that question. Somebody at the front will say, but sir, poor people are getting poorer and rich people are getting richer. I said, yes, rich people are getting richer, this part is true, but poor people are getting poorer, this part is not true. Okay? But still, this perception persists, mainly because the way we economists view it and the way common people view it is totally different. You see, the point is that when they say that poor people are getting poorer, they often really mean that basically inequality. They often have in mind the gap between rich man and the poor man kind of thing. But they do not express it in terms of inequality, they express it in the poor people are getting poorer. Okay. And also, here there's another common misconception, so to say, even in terms of inequality thing, you see. When common people think of inequality, I'm not talking about economists, they mean by inequality the absolute difference in income between the rich person and the poor person. Let me give an example to illustrate what I have in mind. Let's suppose there are two individuals. One person, rich, call him A, you know why I'm calling him A in India, Adani, Ambani or whatever. Okay. So A is the rich man, his income is say 100, and the poor man's P, his income is 1. So initially the difference is 99, 100 minus 1. Now let's now suppose the poor man's income goes up 4 times. From 1 it becomes 4. A's income just doubles from 100 to 200. But the absolute difference, that has increased still. Right? It is 200 minus 4, 196. It is much more than 99. And that is what people often mean by poor people are getting poorer. But we economists do not look at it this way. We'll be talking about what percentage of total income is going to, say, the top 1% versus the bottom 5%, 10% or whatever. Okay. So the way economists view these concepts of inequality, poverty are often very different from how common people understand it. Now, another comment I'll make, that the nature of poverty also has changed very much. I mean, that is also something which many people do not say. When people say the poor people are getting poorer, no, this is first of all not true. Even in terms of pure income, this is not true. But even apart from that, the kind of poverty that all of you, I'm sure, have seen in your childhood, that kind of poverty has almost disappeared from India. I was born in a small village in Birbhum district, right? There, having a bicycle would be considered a huge luxury and only the rich people could afford. Okay. Eating a full egg, that would be a privilege. But now when I go to that same village, I see lots of families of landless labor. They have two-wheelers, not bicycles. They have motorbikes. Many families have got TV. I'm talking about a distant village. Now, if you actually, this thing has also been brought out, a very recently published, you see, what's it called? Household Consumption Expenditure Survey. I have got some figures here, but anyway. So that also establishes this thing that particularly even in rural areas, just one thing, I've got some figures. That's very, very interesting in the figure here. It says 10 years ago, less than 1 in 10 of India's poorest rural households owned a bike or a car. Now close to half do. Okay. In cities or towns, almost all families now have TV sets. even your domestic helps, if you ask them, I mean, they were watching TV, okay? Many families also have got refrigerator, maybe the cheaper variety, but some kind of refrigerator. And nowadays, that's why even the government is coming up with another kind of project, which is called this, the multidimensional poverty concept, which simply does not look at poverty in terms of some minimum income or consumption expenditure. You also look at their access to various other kinds of services, like you look at whether they have a paka house or they have access to electricity, LPG gas, and so many other things. I mean, therefore, even the concept of poverty is also changing. So these are the things which you'll have to keep in mind. I mean, finally, let me end my talk by mentioning an anecdote. Okay. Now, in this early 1990s, when there was heated debates and discussion over liberalization and also whether India should join WTO, whether India should sign WTO. And the WTO draft agreement was known as Dunkel draft. Okay. And it became such a, what should I say, topic of popular discussion. Once I was traveling in a local train from Barakpur to Kolkata, and hawkers were selling Dunkel draft thing in this train, and some people are buying it. I mean, of course, in Bengali. I even bought one just to see, I mean, what kind of things they're saying. Anyway, so now it so happened that in those days, this was the height of left rule here, there are very few people among economists who were willing to write or talk in favor of globalization, rather economic liberalization broadly, and WTO agreement, Dunkel draft. So invariably what happened is that lots of debates and discussions were being organized in various places, and almost invariably, since I was one of the very few persons who were writing and all that, I would be called. And almost invariably, on the other side, I'll meet Professor Omiyo Bagchi. And in some places also, even Dr. Ashok Mitra. Okay? So I had to face a very difficult task, so to say, in some cases, because those are all my mastermosai kind of thing. And Ashok Mitra, after one discussion, even reminded me, almost chided me, Alok, do you know that your father, who was a revolutionary freedom fighter interned in Andaman Cellular Jail, and he was one of the founders of Communist Party in Birbhum. So it is a crime for the son of such a person to talk about even liberalization, globalization, and I also heard from some of my friends that I came to be known as Mr. Dunkel Ray in some circles, and a stooge of IMF and World Bank. Okay. Now, one such debate was taking place in Katakol. And I was invited. And on my side, Professor Saugata Rai was. Saugata Rai was not in. Trinamool was not yet there. So he was a Congress MP. And since Manmohan Singh's Congress government was pushing it, so he was also supporting it. And I was surprised to see he did his homework pretty well. Anyway, on the other side, Omiyo and Gautam Dev. Gautam Dev was then a student leader and perhaps was a junior minister. I'm not too sure, but whatever. Now, at the end of the talk, Gautam Dev made a very interesting observation. He said that it is very good that I came here, because my knowledge on these subjects was limited to 3 or 4 pages that Professor Omiyo Bagchi or Professor Ashok Mitra have written for us. We just read it and we simply repeat it everywhere. So after coming here, I first came to know that, well, there are some points on the other side too. So that was my biggest achievement, if anything, that, okay. And then, in those days, you did not have these Bisleri bottles or anything, so some drinking water was kept in glasses. And while participating in this heated discussion and all that, I drank a few sips. Then after going home in the night, I had severe diarrhea. Okay? So I thought that maybe that is the price of being Mr. Dunkel Ray at that time. And it's two of IMF World Bank. So that was my punishment. But anyway, I'll finish it here. If, in case there are any further questions, etc., then I'll continue.
Yeah, we have time for a few questions.
Okay.
So it's now open to the floor. If you have any questions.
हाँ बोलो.
Question.
हाँ बोलो.
I understood you correctly.
हाँ.
What you're trying to tell that globalization eases the flow of capital.
FDI, I mean only FDI, yes.
Broadly speaking, flow of capital that leads to growth. And with growth, we have observed
Yes.
that poverty
Goes down.
goes down. In fact, I would say that real income increases. And if that is the case, along with inequality of income,
Yes.
why do we make noise about inequality of income? Is it because a sense of envy, fairness, or feeling of deprivation? That's my question.
Okay, here, well, my feeling is something like this. You see, even though again, we economists or the people who watch TV or participate in social media things, etc., we often talk about inequality, Adani, Ambani. But you see, for a poor man, he does not care about how much money Adani, Ambani is making, by what means he is making. That does not actually agitate that person. Okay, I think at least those people, even if they might be using various dubious methods, etc., but here, let me mention one thing as an aside. You see, after Ambani, senior Ambani, died, and then there are lots of people who are speaking after his death. Rahul Bajaj, for example. Rahul Bajaj made one thing, that they say many people are saying that, you see, Ambani has made fortunes by, you see, what should I say, by gaming the system and all kinds of things. But let me be very clear, we all tried to game the system, and he was better at that game. You see? So this is precisely what happens. I mean, we often talk about Adani, Ambani, and all these things, but they are also doing, at least creating jobs, etc. Maybe they are then making money in various ways. And this kind of corruption has been there not just in this BJP government, even in Congress rule. I mean, the Adani's, rather Ambani's growth has started from much earlier and all that. But anyway, this has become almost part of the system. Okay. But again, now, a poor man gets most agitated when he sees someone who is just like one of them suddenly becomes rich by being a local party dada and by siphoning off funds meant for the poor. That what actually agitates him much more than what Adani, Ambani, or whatever inequality that Thomas Piketty might be talking about, you see. But have I answered your question, or?
One question is, why do we care about
Oh yeah, why do we care?
Is it because of sense of
Yes.
fairness? Or is it
Again, this sense of fairness, etc., I'd say there is a hypocrisy here. You see, we, the so-called middle class people, who are much better off than poor people, but we all the time will be arguing for tax concessions. We are very happy that now 12 lakhs up to 12 lakhs have been made tax exempt. But we would never say that we are much better off than the poor people, so we should pay more tax. All the people will be arguing that taxes should be higher, but on whom? The people who are above their income level. Everyone does it. Even the small businesses will say, no, only the big business should pay. Even within big business, they will say, well, we're not as rich as Adani Ambani, so only Adani Ambani should pay. So there is an hypocrisy there. I mean, we all the time talk about inequality, we get very incensed about inequality, but we are not willing to pay our taxes. Only other people will pay taxes. I mean, so in that sense, there is a hypocrisy. And also, I should mention one thing. You see, you will have to accept it as part of the inevitable process. As I said, both India and China, two countries with totally different political systems and even economic systems to some extent, because they have a much bigger public sector than what we have in India right at this moment. But they are having exactly the same kind of economic tendencies. Poverty is going down, inequality is going up, and actually in terms of Gini coefficient, China's Gini coefficient is far worse than India's. And not only that, you must remember that initial conditions are very favorable for China, because in Maoist regime, they started with very little inequality to start with. So within the course of this liberalization thing, but their inequality of income or consumption expenditure, this is the standard Gini, is much higher than in India's. And not only that, the rate at which inequality has gone up in China is almost unprecedented in human history. So it basically is things like that. Basically, you have to accept it that if you want to reduce poverty, given the realities and all that, and given, as I said, our limitations in increasing taxes on the super rich, you see, you will have to accept it that if you want to reduce poverty, inequality will go up. You will have to accept it. Of course, I'm not saying that don't tax the rich or anything like that. But the point is that, as I already pointed out, there are limits to which you can raise taxes on the super rich. Then all these people, actually this has happened in Britain, if you have been following a newspaper, British government, the current Labour British government, was thinking of imposing mansion taxes and inheritance tax and wealth tax at a much higher rate. And some of the super rich people, including our Ellen Mittal, they publicly declared that he will go to Switzerland, and part of the time he'll stay in Dubai. Maybe Dubai is closer to his, maybe India, and Switzerland is closer to his way of living in UK. So he'll have best of both the worlds. And so tax base will shrink, and ultimately maybe the British government will end up collecting less taxes. So you will have to take all these practical considerations into account.
May I just respond to
Sure.
with your permission?
Sure, please.
Just a moment. My take on your question would be, you see, globalization is a great thing. It creates opportunities. There is no doubt about that. But it creates more opportunities for people who are already privileged than people who are less privileged. So our concept, we should care about inequality in the sense that we should, pursue the government to create a situation where the less privileged are also in a position to, take the advantages of globalization. That's my only submission.
In other words, in economist language, as you say, you will give them equal opportunities, not equal outcomes.
Yeah, right, sure.
Sir, my question is, what role the government will take to enhance the connectivity and endowment of the poor people so that they can achieve the benefits of globalization?
Well, as I said, basically you will have to improve the quality of education, not just education, the quality of education, and you will have to give them vocational training, and you will also give them much better physical infrastructure that we have, much better roads so that they can go back and forth from town, spending much less time. The public transport system must be improved. But the most important thing, as I said, is education, quality education, not just education, quality education, not the kind of education where there are schools but teachers don't come, or even if they come, they don't teach and do something else. Not that kind of education. I mean. So, but that is something which is very difficult to achieve, given our, you see, the socio-political system. You can say that, because now what has happened is that all the affluent people's sons and daughters, they are going to now private schools and all that, right? So the quality of public schools, etc., is further going down, because if the affluent people's or influential people's children used to go to these government schools, as it used to happen when we were school children, then if there are any lapses there, then the guardians will immediately complain and things will improve. But nowadays, who will listen to a poor farmer's son, I mean, or poor farmer, that the teacher does not come there, or even if he comes there, he does not teach and does party duties or whatever, I mean.
Even after improved connectivity system,
Yes.
road transport, rail transport, or waterways, there should be some other minimum support service till the cold chain.
Yes, sure.
Second, also the crop protection.
Agreed.
And also because of the seasonal variation, climatic changes in one particular crop season, it may be a huge loss for the farmers. Then what should be the support for them? Unless these things are taken,
Sure.
only some sort of
Agreed.
may not be sufficient enough, as we are finding in our parts of West Bengal.
Actually, this cold storage, warehousing, all these things are very, very important. I give an extreme example of that cart rows going to Amsterdam market. I mean, that's an extreme kind of an example. That requires a highly sophisticated infrastructure in order to make use of these opportunities. But there are many other kinds of opportunities which do not require that kind of an investment or anything, that you have refrigerated vans from your farmland to airport, and then an air cargo takes your cart roses and lands there. No.
Protection against bumper production. You see,
Yes.
storage facility.
Yes.
That is actually happening.
Sure.
Mango
And also there is also some problem here too, because you see the interests of consumers and producers are all the time conflicting. So that what often happens. Whenever, let us say, the onion growers are getting a better price here, and then the government immediately would say, stop their exports. Because otherwise, I mean, because the government wants to keep onion prices low. This is a highly sensitive political thing. I mean, the price of onions and potatoes, etc. So even if there are export opportunities, often the government prohibits exports the moment the farmers get a better price. And this also has a very long-term consequence, that even the foreign, purchasers, they cannot rely on Indian production. If government suddenly comes in and says, stop exports, you see, so then the person at the other end who has signed a contract and all that, I mean, the next time he will not sign a contract with Indian producers, will sign a contract with others. Let me just give you, okay, Homan, yes, question. হ্যাঁ বলো হ্যাঁ
অ্যানেকডোটসগুলো বলেছেন, এটা কয়েকটা আপনার থেকে আগেও শুনেছি, ভুলে গেছি না, আবার শুনলাম। না, আমার একটাই এখানে পয়েন্ট আছে, পিকচারটা আরেকটু না বেশ খানিকটা কমপ্লিকেটেড হয়ে এই কারণে যে যাতে অপরচুনিটিগুলো সবাই ইকুয়ালি অ্যাক্সেস করতে পারে, মোরাললেস এটা দেখার আনইকুয়াল পজিশন থেকে শুরু হয়েছে, এন্ডাওমেন্টের অ্যাক্সেস দিয়ে, তারপরে সেগুলোকে একটু কারেক্টিভ স্টেপ নেওয়া, যাতে যারা তলার দিকে ছিল তারা ওইগুলো অ্যাক্সেস করতে পারে। এটা করার তো দায়িত্ব সরকারের, কিন্তু প্রবলেমটা এইখানে যত ইনইকুয়ালিটি বাড়তে থাকে, বা ইনইকুয়ালিটি বাড়লেই যত ওয়েলথি লোকের সংখ্যা বাড়তে থাকে, একটা ক্লাস যখন ওয়েলথি বড় হতে থাকে, বিজনেস, তারা এবার সরকারকে কন্ট্রোল করতে শুরু করে। সরকার অটোনমাস বডি নয়, যে ইকোনমিস্টদের যে পলিসি বলছে বা আলোকদার যেটা বলছে, এটা আমরা সবাই বুঝতে পারছি। মুশকিল হচ্ছে সরকার এন্ডোজেনাস, এইটা হচ্ছে একটা বিশাল প্রবলেম। এই এন্ডোজেনিটি যেসব দেশ কন্ট্রোল করতে পেরেছে, তাহলে
সোশিওলজিক্যাল ফ্যাক্টর, কালচারাল ফ্যাক্টর দিয়ে তারা তত সাকসেসফুল হয়েছে। এগুলো ইকোনমিক্সের বাইরে। আপনার যে গভর্নমেন্ট এন্ডোজেনাস হয়ে গেল না, পাওয়ার ক্যাপচার করে গভর্নমেন্টকে, ওই পাওয়ারই ওই গভর্নমেন্টকে ওই কাজগুলো করতে দেবে। মানে যাতে সবাই সমান অপরচুনিটি না পায় বহু ক্ষেত্রে। The government will ensure that why the government is controlled by those who are benefiting from those unequal opportunities.
হ্যাঁ, কিন্তু ঠিকই কথা, কিন্তু হ্যাঁ পলিটিক্যাল ইকোনমি প্রবলেম, কিন্তু অ্যাট দ্য সেম টাইম এই জিনিসটাই বলা হতো যে মাল্টিপার্টি পার্লামেন্টারি ডেমোক্রেসিতে অ্যাটলিস্ট নাম্বারস উইল কাউন্ট, অ্যান্ড দেয়ারফর যেহেতু এত গরিব মানুষ আছে তারা যেটা বলবে তাদের কথায় আলটিমেটলি গভর্নমেন্ট শুনতে বাধ্য হবে। ওই জিনিসটা ঘটে না। হ্যাঁ, এক্স্যাক্টলি। ওই ইকোনমিক উনি একটু কিছু বলছেন, উনি মাইক্রোফোনটা নিয়েছে। তুমি বলো, তুমি।
If you see the practicality of last few years or maybe last 7-8 years, we are actually moving against globalization. When I'm saying, like, if US is the biggest proponent of globalization, highest political and economical restriction is coming from there. Like, when I say political, it's through globalization. One of the conditions is free flow of capital as well as goods. So wherever there is a war, there is a problem in the supply chain. So that is anti-globalization. US is raising tariff, that is against free trade. If you see in Indian government, mostly government policy te jada incentive hocche, a major part as of now is like substitution import rather than promoting export. So rather than getting into detail, there is a global trend. I can give other examples. There is a global trend of moving anti-globalization. So your comment on that?
এটা আমি একটা কথা বলি না, এটা হয়তো বলা ঠিক হবে না যে আমরা এক্সপোর্ট করি না বা কিছু। আগের তুলনায় আমাদের ইকোনমি হ্যাজ বিকাম মাচ মোর ওপেন। সি, তুমি যদি ট্রেড টু জিডিপি রেশিও যদি আমরা দেখি, অ্যাকচুয়ালি ফ্রম 1991-এর আগে অবধি যা ট্রেড জিডিপি রেশিও ছিল তার থেকে ওটা অনেক বেশি। সবটাই যে ইম্পোর্ট সাইডে বেড়েছে তা নয়, এক্সপোর্টও আমাদের বেড়েছে। অফকোর্স আমরা যদি চায়নার সঙ্গে কম্পেয়ার করি, তাহলে চায়নার লাস্ট ইয়ারে চায়নার ট্রেড সারপ্লাস হচ্ছে, এক সেকেন্ড, $1 ট্রিলিয়ন, $1 ট্রিলিয়ন ট্রেড সারপ্লাস আছে সেখানে। এটা আমি ইচ্ছে করেই নিয়ে এসেছিলাম এটা দেখানোর জন্যে যে যারা গ্লোবালাইজেশনের সুবিধা নিতে পারছে, আমাদের প্রবলেম ইজ নট টু মাচ গ্লোবালাইজেশন, বাট ইন এ সেন্স টু লিটল গ্লোবালাইজেশন। চায়না, even after this Trump tariff and all that, China trade surplus has now reached record level. Actually, China's export to US has gone up after Trump tariffs. The recent data আমি যা পাচ্ছি তাতে, এবং এখানে একটা কম্প্যারিজন হলে তুমি বুঝতে পারবে ব্যাপারটা। In 2024, China exported $3.6 trillion worth of goods and record $1.1 trillion surplus. Indiaর অবস্থাটা সেখানে কি? India exported $443 billion worth of goods. তো আমাদের টোটাল এক্সপোর্ট ইজ লেস দ্যান দেয়ার সারপ্লাস। কাজে চায়নায় গ্লোবালাইজেশনের সুবিধাটা যতখানি নিতে পেরেছে আমরা সেটা নিতে পারিনি, কারণ যাই হোক না কেন সেগুলো অন্য কথা। কাজেই আমাদের যেটা অনেক সময় বলা হয় না যে আমাদের প্রবলেম গ্লোবালাইজেশন, গ্লোবালাইজেশন ইজ নট আওয়ার প্রবলেম। অ্যাকচুয়ালি গ্লোবালাইজেশন, আওয়ার ডোমেস্টিক পলিসিজ আর আওয়ার প্রবলেম। ইট ইজ নট IMF, ওয়ার্ল্ড ব্যাঙ্ক, WTO রুলস। এই কনটেক্সটে আমি আরেকটা কথা বলি, ওই যেহেতু কাঁটাকলের কথাটা তখন উঠেছিল, সেই সময় যখন ওই লিবারালাইজেশন নিয়ে সব ডিবেট হতো, আমার একটা পাঁচ লাইন ছিল জেনারেলি WTO এগ্রিমেন্টের সময়। আমি জেনারেলি শেষ করতাম, আমার তখন অনেকগুলো স্লাইডও ছিল, কারণ আমাকে অনেক জায়গায় বলতে হতো, দেখেছিলাম স্লাইড তৈরি করে নেওয়া ভালো। বাট এনিওয়ে, সেখানে একটা ছিল লাস্ট লাইনটা আমি বলতাম যে ইন্ডিয়া নিডস WTO ডাজ নট নিড ইন্ডিয়া। এই জিনিসটা যে কত সত্যি এখন বুঝতে পারা যাচ্ছে, কারণ এখন আমরা এই ট্রাম্প ডব্লিউটিওর কোনো রুল মানবেন না, কিচ্ছু মানবে না। তখন তার ফলে আমাদের যারা গরিব দেশ বা যাদের লেস পাওয়ারফুল দেশ তাদের বিশাল আমি সেটাই বলেছিলাম, যদি ডব্লিউটিও রুলস আমরা না মানি তাহলে আমাদের আমেরিকান প্রেসিডেন্টের সঙ্গে বসে পাঞ্জা লড়তে হবে। সেখানে আমরা পাঞ্জা লড়ে পারবো না। ওই ডব্লিউটিও রুলসের প্রোটেকশন হচ্ছে অনলি প্রোটেকশন ফর আওয়ার লেস পাওয়ারফুল পিপুল। কাজে ওই গ্লোবাল রুলস আমাদের একটা মানতেই হবে, সেটা না মানলে পরে হবে না। ওটা যেমন আমাদের হাত কিছুটা আটকায়, কিন্তু তার থেকে অনেক বেশি ওরা রেস্ট্রিক্ট করে ওই মানে বড় লোক দেশের কী বলবো আরবিট্রারিনেসটাকে। সেটা এখন দেখা যাচ্ছে। এখন তো প্রত্যেকটা দেশের কি অবস্থা হয়েছে, ট্রাম্প যা বলবে আলটিমেটলি, যত আমরা চেঁচামেচি করি আলটিমেটলি সবাই সুসুর করে ট্রাম্পের কথা শুনতে বাধ্য হচ্ছে। হ্যাঁ, এখন অন্য আদার রাস্তা কি, এখন একটা এই আমাদের পার্টিকুলারলি ইন্টারন্যাশনাল ট্রেড এসবের অ্যাব্রিভিয়েশনগুলো ভীষণ, এখন একটা নতুন অ্যাব্রিভিয়েশন আছে MATA, মাইনাস আমেরিকা ট্রেড এগ্রিমেন্ট, মাটা। উইল হ্যাভ টু গো ফর মাটা। এখন সব কান্ট্রি সেটা চেষ্টা করছে, ইন্ডিয়াও করছে, প্রচণ্ড দেশের সঙ্গে আলাদা 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 করে বাইল্যাটারাল ট্রেড এগ্রিমেন্ট করছে। এইভাবে আমরা ডাইভার্সিফাই করার চেষ্টা করছি আমাদের এক্সপোর্ট মার্কেট অ্যাওয়ে ফ্রম US। এই 2-3 দিন আগে, এটা একটা এক্সাম্পল হিসেবে বলি তাহলে বুঝতে পারবে কী ধরনের জিনিস হচ্ছে, ওমানের সঙ্গে আমাদের একটা ট্রেড এগ্রিমেন্ট হয়েছে। এতে এই ট্রেড এগ্রিমেন্টে কীরকম হয়েছে, 98% অফ আওয়ার এক্সপোর্টস টু ওমান উইল গো ডিউটি ফ্রি, কেমন। এবং ইন্ডিয়ান কোম্পানি ওমানে যারা গিয়ে মানে প্রোডাকশন করবে হোয়াটএভার, দে ক্যান এমপ্লয় 50% অফ দেয়ার ওয়ার্কফোর্স ইন্ডিয়ান ওয়ার্কফোর্স। প্রিভিয়াসলি ইট ওয়াজ 20%। সো এই ধরনের অনেক ফেভারেবল আমরা বাইল্যাটারাল ট্রেড এগ্রিমেন্ট করার চেষ্টা করছি। এগুলো এখন এগুলো শুধু ট্রেড এগ্রিমেন্ট নয়, এগুলোকে বলে সিপা, কম্প্রিহেন্সিভ ইকোনমিক পার্টনারশিপ এগ্রিমেন্ট, হুইচ ইজ সামওয়াট ব্রডার দ্যান বাইল্যাটারাল ট্রেড এগ্রিমেন্ট। আমরা ইউকের সাথে অলরেডি একটা সাইন করেছি, ইউরোপিয়ান ইউনিয়নের সঙ্গে নেগোসিয়েশন চলছে, যে কোনো সময় সাইন হতে পারে। বেশ কিছু আমরা গালফ কান্ট্রির সঙ্গে অলরেডি করেছি, UAEর সাথে হয়েছে, ওমানের সাথে হলো। এবং শুধু ওমানের সাথে করার যে সুবিধাটা হবে, ওমান বা দুবাই ওইটাকে বেস করে এবার ওখান থেকে আবার এক্সপোর্ট করা যায় অনেক জায়গাতে। ওটা একটা ওয়্যার হাউসের মতো একটা জিনিস হচ্ছে আর কি ওখান থেকে। এবং সেটার ভেতর দিয়ে আমরা আমাদের শত্রু পাকিস্তানেও এক্সপোর্ট করি, কারণ দুবাইয়ের ভেতর দিয়ে ইন্ডিয়ান গুডস পাকিস্তানে যায় আর কি, এবং ওখান থেকে আবার এদিকে আসে, এভাবেই হয় আর কি। তো এই বেসিক্যালি এখন এই বাইল্যাটারাল ট্রেড এগ্রিমেন্টস এই সময়ের ভেতর দিয়ে সবাই চেষ্টা করছে আমেরিকাকে বাদ দিয়ে বাঁচা যায় কিনা, এবং নতুন করে প্রচুর নেগোসিয়েশনস হচ্ছে। আমি এই কনটেক্সটে একটা বলি, একটা ট্রেড পলিসি একটা হোয়াটসঅ্যাপ গ্রুপ আছে, তো আই হ্যাপেন টু বি এ মেম্বার অফ দ্যাট গ্রুপ। সেটাতে প্রচুর ইন্ডিয়ার নাম করা পলিসি মেকার পাস্ট এবং প্রেজেন্ট তারা ওটার মেম্বার, এবং অনেক সিনিয়র ব্যুরোক্র্যাটসও আছেন, ইকোনমিস্ট আছেন, বোর্ড ট্রেড ইকোনমিস্ট ইত্যাদি ইত্যাদি। তো সেখানে মোটামুটি এটাই এখন কনসেনসাস হচ্ছে, চেষ্টা করছে সবাই যে আমেরিকাকে বাদ দিয়ে আর একটা নতুন WTO আর একটা ফ্রেমওয়ার্ক তৈরি করা এবং সেটা সাইন করা আলটিমেটলি। মানে তো সেটা যদি করতে পারা যায় তাহলে 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 ভালো। কিন্তু সেটা না, ডেটা দিয়ে অনেক সময় চাইনিজ ডেটা নিয়ে অনেক সময় সন্দেহ প্রকাশ করা হয় ঠিকই, বাট অ্যাট দি সেম টাইম এ বিষয়ে কোনো সন্দেহ নেই যে চায়না আমাদের থেকে অনেক এগিয়ে আছে। মানে এখন এক্স্যাক্ট অনেক সময় পার্টিকুলার কোনো একটা পার্টিকুলার ইয়ারের ডেটা নিয়ে অনেক সময় সন্দেহ, অনেক সময় যেটা দেখা গেছে ওরা যেটা সেন্ট্রাল যেটা গ্রোথ রেট বলছে, এবার যদি স্টেটের গ্রোথ রেটগুলো আমরা যদি অ্যাড করি তাহলে দেখা যাচ্ছে যে ওর সাথে মিলছে না। এই ধরনের প্রবলেম আছে, সেটা আমাদের ইন্ডিয়ান ডেটা সম্বন্ধেও অনেকে অনেক রকমের প্রশ্ন অ্যাকচুয়ালি তুলে থাকেন, ইনক্লুডিং অরবিন্দ সুব্রমণিয়াম, যিনি আগের গভর্নমেন্টের আমলে আমাদের চিফ ইকোনমিক অ্যাডভাইসার ছিলেন। তিনিও অনেক সময় উনি যখন চিফ ইকোনমিক অ্যাডভাইসার ছিলেন তখনই অনেক সময় উনি প্রশ্ন করেছেন। আমার একটা সময় মনে আছে রঘুরাম রাজন এবং এরা দুজনে মিলে কথাবার্তা বলছিলেন, এবং তখন রঘুরাম রাজন বলছিলেন যে তুমি থামো, তুমি আর বলো না, আই উইল বি ইন ট্রাবল, মানে সো কাজে এই ডেটা সবসময়ই একটা মানে কি বলবো মানে কোয়েশ্চেনেবল একটা জিনিস, সেটা সব দেশেরই। ট্রাম্প কি করছে, ট্রাম্প যদি আনফেভারেবল ডেটা হয় তাহলে ডেটাটাকেই বার করতে দিচ্ছে না, এবং তাই লোকটা চাকরি খেয়ে দিচ্ছে। হয়েছে লেবার ডেটা যে বুড়োর থেকে বেরোতো, যেহেতু ডেটাটা ওর পছন্দ হয়নি তো ওই লোকটার চাকরি খেয়ে দিয়েছে, আর একটা লোককে বলছে যে ভালো ডেটা দেবে ওকে। অতএব
Sorry, I mean, my বিরুদ্ধে রাইটিং ফর গ্র্যানুলার লেভেলস মাই ডিগ্রি আমি একটা ডিএফআইতে কাজ করতাম, যে হোয়াট আই ফাউন্ড ওয়াজ যে জিডিপিটা প্রথমে যেটা বললেন যে বাড়াচ্ছে এই দেখাচ্ছে, পরের বছরে to show next year's GDP on this thing, ideology, we have so many estimates, correct? And this continues. These are optics. IMF recently data they have given a certain suboptimal rating. The spin doctors have said, including the RBI governor, deputy governor, that really has said, no, data need not. The way we're doing it is the fact. What IMF has said very politely is that you're forging the data. That's how I read it.
অভিরূপ হয়তো এটা বেটার বলতে পারে, অভিরূপ স্ট্যাটিস্টিক্সের মানে আইএসআইয়ের ধারে পাশে থাকে, জানতে পারে বেটার। তো কিন্তু এটা সত্যি কথা যে আমাদের যেটা ডেটা যখন হয়, তোমার কুইক এস্টিমেটস বলে, তারপর রিভাইজড এস্টিমেট, এটা কিন্তু খানিকটা সত্যিই হয়। এটা ডেটা সবসময় ডেটাটা আসতে সময় লাগে, এবং পরে যখন পুরো ডেটাটা আসে তখন ওটা রিভাইজড হয়। এবং সবসময়ই যে ধরো মানে জিডিপি গ্রোথ বেড়ে যাচ্ছে রিভাইজ ডেটাতে তা কিন্তু নয়, কখনো কখনো এমন হয়েছে যে কমেও যায়। অতএব ইট ইজ নট দ্যাট যে সেখানে মিস্টেক্স থাকতে পারে, কিন্তু খুব সিস্টেমেটিক বায়াস আছে কি না সেটা খুব একটা পরিষ্কার নয়। কিন্তু জানি না তোমার কি এক্সপেরিয়েন্স।
আমাকে বলেছিল তুই আমাদের এটার এতে যাস না, ইট ইজ ফাজি। সো ডেটা ইজ অলওয়েজ ফাজি। আগে তো হতো না, এখন তো ডেটা ফর দ্য লাস্ট, আই এম সরি টু সে, ইট ইজ নট ক্রেডিবল। We go to the market, are you look at the price data, wholesale inflation পড়ছে, does it tally with when I go to the market and buy my vegetables?
এটা কিন্তু সব জায়গায় হয়, আমেরিকাতেও হয় ডেটা ফাজিং, হয় না তা নয়। আমাকে একবার উইলফ্রেড ইথিয়ার বলেছে,
হ্যাঁ আমি জানি ভালো করেছি।
হ্যাঁ মানে অদ্ভুতভাবে ওয়ার্ল্ড ব্যাংক কিছু ডেটা মিসিং ডেটা বসিয়ে দিয়েছে, মানে এখানে ওখান থেকে নিয়ে। অতএব ইটস নট স্পেসিফিক।
হ্যাঁ আমি তোমাদের একটা